Well, good evening, everyone joining us tonight on this Tuesday evening, August 27th. And for those of you that are listening in at a later date, we're really happy to have you with us tonight. We have a special program. This is the night where we usually do our advocacy check-ins. And we have a particular program that we wanted to focus on tonight, dealing with a partnership that National Peace Corps Association has been involved with for the last couple of months. Power the Polls, as it relates to trying to encourage people to work as poll workers in the upcoming elections. And we are very pleased. That'll be the first probably 45 minutes of the program, and then we'll do a little check-in on some other business items before we close out tonight. But let's get right to it. And I am very happy that we are joined tonight at the outset here by the partnerships manager of Power the Polls, Sandra, who is with us here, and also my boss, my good friend, Dan Baker, President and CEO of National Peace Corps Association. We're really excited to have you all and both of you here tonight. And so we're going to get right to it. And Dan is going to do a brief interview with Sandra for some updates. So Dan, take it away.
Well, first of all, I think we're all riding, not to make this political, but it is the season that our community is often very excited to promote democracy and to really get involved in our country's democracy. And I think this is a really natural partnership. Again, not waving any political banners, but we are. I think the country is in a time of hope for addressing some of the concerns, and we all are pretty politically attuned and know what happened 4 years ago with the polls, and we think that Peace Corps volunteers often offer the type of skills that serve best. And when we talk about conflict de-escalation and just person-to-person support and approach, not to mention the intercultural skills and language skills that we offer polling places in need. So Sandra, thank you. I think you reached out to us first, and it's really was an easy decision for us to promote getting Peace Corps volunteers, not volunteering, but employed and applying for short-term jobs in the polls in November. My first question is, this is the month when you're trying to make things happen, and anything else you want to say about getting Peace Corps involved. But I'd love to hear how August 1st has gone from your perspective, August 1st being the National Poll Worker Day, Recruitment Day, and what the current needs are following, maybe comparing 4 years ago to this year. How are you doing with recruitment right now?
I would love to answer all of those questions. Thank you so much for having me. It has been a pleasure partnering with you and Jonathan and the rest of your team. The Peace Corps Alumni Association is a pretty critical partner for us. You all have done such a fabulous job in recruiting poll workers across the country, which is why we heavily lean on partners like you to help us achieve some of our goals this year. And so I can just kind of backtrack and give everyone on the call just a little bit more information about our initiative. So we are a nonpartisan organization. We were started in 2020 during a very significant presidential year, as you already know. And we were started because our founders, which is a group of organizations under an alliance, founded that we needed poll workers. There was a surge and uptick in voter turnout. And we needed to ensure that those voters were going to be supported at the polls. And what that means is we needed more poll workers. We needed poll workers who were competent, reliable, savvy, really great people to work with. And then also poll workers who were bilingual as well for areas that were needing some language translations. And so what happened then in 2020 is that we had a lot of success. We ended up recruiting over 750,000 poll workers that election year. And then going into the midterms, we found more success. So fast forward to 2024, we decided to make August 1st of this year poll worker recruitment day, as we have done in previous years, because we want to create a tent pole moment. And what that means is we wanted to create a moment where we can drive the most poll worker recruitment over one day, or at least the course of 1 week, through our partners. And for those who don't know, we work within a partner network. We work with nonpartisan organizations, businesses, influencers, media companies, alumni associations, and the like, to essentially spread the word and amplify the need for poll workers. And by doing so, we were able to recruit a ton of poll workers on August 1st. Although I can't release the numbers here, we haven't decided whether or not we are going to release it publicly. I will say that we have seen various partners engage with us in all types of ways that were really fruitful. We've seen folks engage through op-eds, and thank you National Peace Corps as well for engaging that way as well. We've seen some social media posts, we've seen a lot of news coverage across the country on national outlets to we've done some podcasts. We've also had partners do some op-eds and letters to the editor, which are extremely helpful and very hyper local. When I say hyper local, I mean like small town regional newspapers, which to us I think matters a lot, because that's where, you know, we find folks, is through the local news outlets. And they were also helping amplify some of that need and the recruitment efforts into smaller communities, which is where a lot of these polling places have need for in rural and urban communities. And then I think just kind of comparing it to your question, Dan, to 2022, which was our previous election year, I have some data here that shows in 2022, we activated 275,000 poll workers. I can't say, I can't give numbers on this year, but I will say we did really significantly well. We did so well that we are actually doing another day of action, because we are now tracking all jurisdictions across the country, which is pretty significant. And what that means is we're going to identify more need for poll workers. And so we're using September 5th as our secondary day of action for people to go ahead and sign up to become a poll worker.
Fabulous. And we are very happy to be partnering with you for the first time. And you gave some examples as we were earlier in this conversation of some of your other partners. And I wonder if you might share with our participants this evening, who are some of your more tried and productive recruiting partners for poll workers, and anything that you can point to as something that those communities have done really well that we might be inspired by to help mobilize our community.
You know, I will say that the National Peace Corps is one of our top partners. And I think some of the things that you have done have been very helpful and have been replicated through other organizations and partners. Some other partners that I can name off are League of Women Voters. I'm sure you all have heard of them. They are also a pretty significant partner. They're very deep in the community. They have a lot of state chapters. I'm assuming you guys also have a lot of state chapters as well. And then we also work with chambers of commerce. We work with media groups. We also work with companies. We have a company arm as well, where we do a lot of corporate outreach. We work with Uber, with MTV. We work with Nextdoor. And then on the partner organizational side, we work with When We All Vote. Then we also have some social justice partners, like the NBA actually has a social justice arm, and they've been doing a lot of social media posting. In terms of the tactics and ways of engagement, it it varies. We have seen some really creative stuff come from partners who are doing interviews on podcasts where they're talking about this election cycle, and they're also talking about voter registration, but they managed to weave in the importance of poll working. This has now become a very critical part, as it always has been, but there's more light shown on it, that this is now a really critical part of our democracy. In order to flood the polling places with voters, we need to have open polling places. And so amplifying that message is pretty key. I think another narrative and tactic, I should say, that our partners are really good at too, is also bringing to light the positive aspect of it. Um, Poll working is something that, we rely on as voters. And I think sometimes at least I know myself, I didn't really think twice about a poll worker. I mean, when I walked into a polling place, I was like, wow, this is a great experience. But I never put more thought into how does this actually operate? And now being part of this initiative, I've seen how it's operated, and I'm like, wow, this is an incredibly critical piece of democracy that we need to focus on. And so going back to what your question was, Dan, the positive aspects and the education around what poll workers do has been a really great tactic and a really great narrative to uplift. And then, this just the op-eds, the LTEs have been very effective. Social media is very, very effective as well. And I will say for folks who are doing text banking, we've seen some organizations that have volunteer bases that will do peer-to-peer texting and pull up their list of phone numbers from their own personal, I don't want to say Rolodex, but I'm sure you all still maybe have a Rolodex, but your iPhones, whatever you're working with, and just call up family members and say, hey, did you want to become a poll worker? It's paid and it looks like there's potential need in your county. And so we've seen that peer-to-peer texting and peer-to-peer phone calls really help as well.
I think that's a really inspirational idea for us to get involved. And as we think about the areas of greatest need that you mentioned, and by the way, you're not old enough to know what a Rolodex is, I think. Um, when we think about the areas of greatest need, I'm really curious what kind of comes to mind, not just geographically, but for language needs and for types of skill sets that are areas of need for working the polls, and kind of overlaying that. Um, and we had one participant sign off immediately, indicating that in Washington State they vote by mail. Wonder if you might comment on that. Obviously you still need poll workers, and even though we're voting by mail, and I wonder if that is adding to complacency. Oh, we don't need poll workers because everybody's voting by mail now.
So and I will say that I have been approached with that, and I was also taken aback. And I did a little bit of research and spoke to my colleague who works closely with election administrators, and she said, yeah, they still do need poll workers because they need to pick up ballots for some voters. They need to pick up ballots. There are other opportunities as well for some of those poll workers. I think they also need drivers too. There's just an array of different types of work that a poll worker does. And I think for Washington State, they are different because they're mailing in their ballots. But I think from my knowledge, I know that there is still some need for people who live in rural counties who may need some access there and
Yeah,
access support.
yeah.
But to your other questions in terms of where the need is, so we at Power the Polls, we have our own database where we work with election administrators. We try to communicate with them as much as possible to get all of their updates on where their needs are, what type of needs, quantity as well, in addition to jurisdiction. So that's county, city, precinct based, all that good stuff. And they give us that information. And then we in turn have a database that you guys know about, and that you're able to access, and you can pull a list of where those jurisdictions are. And then our partners then turn around and share that with their base, their volunteer base, their audience, or they do specific types of recruitment. On this call, I can share that there are some time sensitive jurisdictions that have need, and these are elections that are coming up that have primaries. So It looks like Georgia has applications for the general election in many places with the date of 8/31, so August 31st. For big cities like Atlanta and Athens. Then we have Massachusetts. Statewide, there is a primary election on September 3rd. There are about like 35 jurisdictions with strong poll worker needs, including Boston. Then there's also New Hampshire. New Hampshire has a September 10th primary election. There are about 12 jurisdictions there, and I could share that with Jonathan, but New Hampshire has some need as well. And then Rhode Island is one of the other primary jurisdictions that has a September 10th primary happening. They have about 8 jurisdictions with need, and I could also share that with Jonathan too. But these are the top 4 places that we've identified that have immediate, like, we need people now for the primary elections. When we brought in that map, I have to say that it is very, the need is across the country. And when it comes to bilingual needs, it is the same cast of characters where Spanish language needs are our number one need. And it's within communities that we know have very dense pockets of Latino Hispanic population. So that's like Miami-Dade, places across California, the Northeastern corridor. And surprisingly, there are some places like in Nebraska, Idaho, that we've identified as having Spanish language needs. And when I say bilingual, I mean these election administrators want people to have both English and the other language fluency. And then we've also identified at least 25 additional languages across the country that are needed. And a lot of these are Asian, South Asian languages as well.
Okay. Okay. Well, you've already talked about one thing that's kind of coming up next on September 5th is round 2 of poll worker recruitment day. What else are we looking forward to as far as next steps with for you in the coming weeks? How can we help?
So I think there are many ways that you can help. I think one is signing up to become a poll worker. So the way that this works is if you go to powerthepolls.org /NPCA, I will share that link in the chat as well. You can put your name, your email, your phone number, and your zip. And that will then take you to your local Board of Elections, and it will give you information on your Board of Elections as well. And for some areas, it shows how much you are entitled to be paid for a poll worker position. Now, when you go ahead and click complete your application, that will then take you to the Board of Elections that you are registered for, given that you are putting in the zip code of where you are registered to vote. And so when you do get there, then you would want to complete your application on the Board of Elections website that you are forwarded on to. You will receive an email reminder asking you to complete your application if you don't do it then and there from Power the Polls. But for the most part, we at Power the Polls, we don't follow up with you. The Peace Corps may follow up with you. I don't want to put that on you, Dan or Jonathan. But for the most part, the Board of Elections will follow up with you when you do complete your application. So one, our direct ask is please sign up to become a poll worker. If they are full, they'll let you know. If they are not full and they need your help, they will call you, but please be patient. It may take a few weeks for folks who do have a priority area. It may be sooner. They may ask you to come in for training and then you'll be scheduled. It is a process, but we ask that you are patient and that you do follow through with the instructions that you're given. And then the other thing too is like join a volunteer text bank, put together a poll worker recruitment event, share the link with your family and friends, repost on social media. And if you wanted to engage even more, I can share some more resources with Jonathan on how to write a letter to the editor as a poll worker or as a volunteer and an alumni, or even writing an op-ed if you feel like you have more expertise in this area. And sometimes we've seen really, really great LTEs be very short and sweet. And the short and sweet narrative is, we need poll workers. This election is going to turn out so many voters. We need your help in this area. Please sign up. Here's a link. One and done. That is it. It doesn't need to be a huge essay. So we've seen some really great traction with that. And then just lastly, social media. I think I mentioned this before, but just resharing that link, and recruiting your family and friends. And if you have younger folks in your family who are registered at home and are home from college, there are some jurisdictions that allow for poll workers to be as young as 16. And pre-register to vote. So that is a really awesome thing. I've heard of folks from the League of Women Voters say that they wanted to bring their high school kids with them and make it a family event. And I think that that is a beautiful thing. I wish somebody would write about it. So I'm just waiting for that LTE to come through. But that is pretty much it. And I will share more resources, as I said, with Jonathan. And I hope that I hope this is helpful to you all. And I'm happy to answer any other questions that you have and even share some visuals too.
Well, that's it for me. I'll turn it back to Jonathan if you want to see if there's any other questions, Jonathan. But I want to say thank you to Sandra. I did put the link to your website in the chat there, so you can find it, powerthepolls.org/NPCA. And kudos on the website. I think your list of resources there and the ability to seamlessly sign up is really facilitating a lot of good supportive democracy. So thank you,
Thank you.
Jonathan.
And Sandra, I know you said you brought a couple of slides, and maybe just if you can share them just within like a two to 3 minutes, if that hopefully is enough time. Love to have you do that.
Yeah, I think I can share. There are a few that I'd like to share.
Okay.
So give me 1 second while I pull them
I
up.
just want to be, aware of time too. So, but yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
very quick. So give me a second. Here we go. So let me just backtrack here. This is what it looks like. This is what the website looks like. So you sign up, you put your name and your information in, you're then redirected to the one step closer to powering the polls. In this case, the county that is pulled up for this person is Washington, D.C. It shows the hours, the compensation, additional details about the polling place. And then this is sort of just a little roadmap, as I mentioned, for all of you visual learners on the call. Complete your application, be persistent and patient, and then wait to get trained if there is still need in your polling place. Because of poll worker recruitment day and additional efforts that we've had with our partners and friends and allies in the field, we've been seeing some quick responses and turnaround for some precincts being full and fully recruited, but then we've seen some areas still have need. So it really just does depend on where you're working. And then, I did cover this, but there was one other slide that I wanted to share. And I think I just wanted to emphasize this before I get off the call. We are learning from our partners in the field, from our news sources, that there's a lot of enthusiasm around the presidential race. And what that means is that the increased enthusiasm is going to have an anticipated increased turnout of voters. Therefore, there is going to be an increased, very strong need for poll workers and very dependable poll workers. And if we don't have those poll workers, we're going to end up seeing really long lines. We're going to end up seeing polling places getting closed early or even just not opening at all because poll workers open polling places. So this is why I'm jumping on this call to say, please sign up to become a poll worker. You are needed, you're valued. You play a very important role in this election and beyond. And it's a good time. You get to hand out stickers too. So I'm going to stop here and stop sharing, but I'm happy to jump back into it if anyone has questions.
Great. Thank you very much. And we're going to transition here. Excuse me. But thank you again, Sandra. And congratulations on all your work and your dedication to our democracy. Really appreciate that.
Thank
So
you. Thank you.
I'm going to bring a couple of other people on here now. Hopefully, there we go. Because not surprisingly, a number of people on this call, and I'm happy to say we have people from all around the country, from San Diego, Hawaii, Ohio, Kentucky, Colorado. So it's great to have a lot of representation around the country with us here tonight. But not surprisingly, we have returned Peace Corps volunteers who have been have worked as poll workers. And so we wanted to give a little time to hear from a couple of them. And Sandra, if you are able to stick around, hopefully we'll have a little time for questions. But if you do have to go, that's perfectly fine. But let's introduce you to Miriam Nitzberg and Marvin Hancock, two people that are returned Peace Corps volunteers and who've worked as poll workers. So just briefly tell us a little bit about yourselves. Your work as a poll worker. Where have you served as a poll worker? How long have you been a poll worker? And then briefly, like, what have been some of the roles you've done as poll workers? So Marvin, why don't we start with you?
I've been a poll worker now for about 15 years. I am a poll worker in Lee County, Florida, which is the biggest city we have is Fort Myers, Florida. We're just above Naples in Southwest Florida. I've worked all over the county in different locations, in Lee County facilities, buildings, churches, all over the place. In the last few years, I work in an office of the supervisor of election, and I've been working in early voting polls now. I've been doing that for several years.
That's great, and we'll get back to more of your work. But Miriam, how about you?
I am in Loudoun County, Virginia, so just outside Washington, D.C. I've been a poll worker for 4 years. And like Marvin, I've done a lot of things, moved up from election officer to help desk to assistant chief to chief. I'm also an early voting manager now and have been doing other things as well, like the logic and accuracy testing on voting machines before the elections, and then canvassing, which is checking the paperwork after the elections. And I've been involved in auditing as well.
So for both of you, you've kind of risen through the ranks in terms of various opportunities and roles within the poll workers. And I guess just I guess that's one thing maybe people might not think of, is there's a whole variety of roles and responsibilities for the poll workers. And was there anything that really surprised you or you weren't expecting, or for people that maybe have never done this before and are thinking about it? What was the thing that, tell us something that surprised you or was maybe unexpected about your role as poll worker? And this time we'll start with you, Marian.
I guess the first thing that comes to mind is the amount of paperwork. And even though a precinct chief is responsible for the paperwork, there's paperwork, everyone does paperwork. If you count the ballots, there's ballot record reports, and things like the ballots get counted before you can give them out. You have to, there's a whole chain of custody thing and knowing if any ballots have gone missing or anything like that. So just a lot of record keeping and paperwork. And that surprised me only because I'd never thought about it before.
Marvin, how about you? Anything that surprised you?
The nicest thing about working in the poll, and I guess a surprise, is how nice the voters are and how nice it is to work with the team that I work with. Usually work with a team of about 15 people at the poll. The other thing that surprised me is how well organized the poll is. Incredibly well organized. The training, the systems, with very modern equipment, modern systems. We do count, as you say, we have some of the older style ballots, and we count those in and count those out. But most work is now electronic with paper.
So I'm glad you brought up training, Marvin, because love to hear, for again, people that are considering being poll workers, how much training can they expect? Is it different training for different roles? Tell us a little bit about what people might expect in terms of being trained. And then Miriam, we'll go to you and see if there's any, I'm not sure if there's differences between jurisdictions as it relates to training, but Marvin, go ahead.
I can tell you only about the state of Florida. By law, in the state of Florida, a poll worker must have 3 hours training before every election. And currently, that's about 2 hours classroom training at a downtown at an office of the supervisor of election, and about 1 hour video training. So training is mandated, and that's the state of Florida law.
Miriam, does that sound similar or?
Similar, yeah. We've got everyone has to train before every election. So in the state of Virginia, this November election will be our 3rd election this year, and everyone has to do their training each time. I don't know if there's a rule. I know training is about 3 hours. And then, of course, there's separate training, some specialized training for help desk, for technical specialist we've got as well, which is just someone who does extra training in learning about all the machines we use, and then chief and assistant chief training, which has to do with a lot of paperwork and precinct management.
One other question about that, especially for maybe entry level positions, are there I know you said some might be video training where I assume there's flexibility in terms of doing it. With some of the other training, is it like a set time or is there like multiple times that you would have the opportunity to train? If you follow what I'm asking there.
Yeah, for us, it's, I mean, and I imagine it's the same everywhere. It's multiple times. They're training so many people. We have in Loudoun County, we have 107 precincts that they have to staff. And so there's trainings offered all over, they'll be actually this time around all over the county. They're not going to keep it all central. But during the day, in the evening, at the weekend as well, so that it works out for everybody. And ours is all in person, except secretly they offer some online. If people really swear they can't make any of the in-person trainings, they do have a couple of online sessions.
And again, Marvin, does that, go ahead. Sounds like you've got some thoughts to add.
Our training is, as I said, 2 hours classroom training. Once you've signed up as a poll worker, we receive a letter from the supervisor of election, and they give us a date for training, which is currently at a central facility in the county. The 1 hour additional training is we look at specialized videos that are recorded by the supervisor of election, by the state election bureau. For example, working with people with disabilities, how to de-escalate problems which arise, and so forth. So that's 1 hour's training. Those are required. When I started, it was 3 hours classroom training. And now it's changed a little bit.
A couple more questions. So you're both returned Peace Corps volunteers, and please share where you served and when you served. And question is, why do you think RPCVs make good poll workers? And is there anything that from your Peace Corps experience that has been of benefit to you as a poll worker? So Marvin, why don't you start off with this question?
Spanish. We don't get a lot of people in the poll who need help with Spanish. We get a lot of Spanish voters, Spanish-speaking voters, but most of them vote in English and don't need help. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Colombia. I joined the Peace Corps in 1963, did 3 months training at the University of New Mexico. And then from there, our group moved down to Colombia, and I was in Colombia 2.5 years, and then I worked in Washington for a little bit as training a group, at GW, and then got a job with the Peace Corps after that, and returned to Columbia as what we called a regional representative for Southern Columbia, where we had about 55 volunteers working. And
And how
so
about you in terms of your service? And then also, is there anything from your service that you kind of look back to as it relates to your work as a poll worker?
this is for Miriam, right?
Yep, Miriam, are you there?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry. I thought you were asking Marvin a follow-up. I served in the Czech Republic from 1992 to 1994. And going back to what makes Peace Corps volunteers good. Some of the things that I think Sandra had also said about, or Dan said, I don't remember, language, intercultural skills, but also the comfort in new situations, the willingness to learn almost anything. And speaking of language, I have actually spoken Czech to a voter, which might be kind of surprising, but every language can come in handy. Something about my service, because I was in the Czech Republic when it was just a couple of years out of communism. So of course, just the new appreciation for democracy, really. And that was one of the things that made me want to also be part of the process.
Great. And last question, and this is, as we were talking, it's an exciting period, but it's also been a period of concern. And certainly I think we all have read stories about safety and security issues and an increase in concern about that as it relates to our elections and people going to the polls. So what can you say to people, anything you can share to address concerns people might have about safety and security at polling places? Miriam, why don't we start with you?
Here where I am in Loudoun County, we don't really have issues, or I should say haven't had, except earlier this year, one of the elections, there was a bomb threat, but it was against a school. It was a kid that called in a bomb threat to the school, just happened to be on election day, and we happened to have a polling place in the school. So we do have procedures in place. And they moved the precinct out into the parking lot, and then they moved it into another location. But what we've had since then, so in our last election, we were trained in emergency procedures. This is what you do if there's any kind of emergency. So not just security, but a fire. And now we get a kit with, instructions to give to each person and what they're supposed to grab and stuff like that in case of an emergency. So we have extra preparation. The main thing about security for us is we have the local law enforcement we have priority with law enforcement. So if a polling place calls anything in, law enforcement will be there really fast. So whether it's anything from a disruptive voter to something serious.
And Marvin, how about anything you want to add to that?
Not really. We don't have, in Bonita Springs, where I live, we don't have great security issues. The poll I work in is attached to the supervisor of elections office in Bonita Springs. We actually have an armed guard in the poll. So, and we're next door to the tax office, and the tax office has the deputy sheriff there. So we're quite comfortable where I actually work. With the more than 100 precincts around, it's the same sort of thing that Miriam mentioned, that if we call 911 from a precinct, they're there quickly to help us. And I only remember one call to 911, and that's when people were inside the 150-foot limit that they shouldn't be in, electioneering. So I have never felt any issues related to security at the poll.
Great. Well, I want to thank you both very much, not only for being with us tonight, but continuing the third goal of the Peace Corps as civic servants in your communities and doing this very important work. And as I take you off the screen, I just again want to say thank you, Miriam, thank you, Marvin, for your service. And there's been some great chat comments, and I think at least one or two people have signed up to be poll workers during the course of this session. So hopefully others that are listening in at a later time will also consider becoming poll workers. We're going to be highlighting our next Thursday, which is September 5th. Our e-news is expected to come out, our NPCA e-news, and we'll have a reference to the action day. We've got maybe about 5-6 minutes. If anybody has any questions, unfortunately, Sandra had to leave, but if you have any questions, and I know we've also got other poll workers who are on this call, so please feel free to raise your hand if there's something you wanted to offer in terms of your experiences. And I think I saw Darcy, your hand is up, so if you want to, yeah, go ahead, Darcy.
We're talking about RPCVs, but my interest in poll working was when I was a country director, and I was trying to gather, the absentee ballots and the mail-in ballots from volunteers and seeing the variety. So I know I think we should be talking to country directors too about this isn't a wasted resource. It's going to come in handy someday in terms of the variety and the precision, right, and the importance of setting that up. I don't know if Peace Corps does any plugging with overseas staff on that, but that should be happening now also, not just RPCVs, but American staff. So,
right. Thank you for that. And let's see, I see Joey, go ahead. You've got your hand up.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Just wanted to say in Queens, where I live in the precinct of Rosedale, we have to pack a bottle of patience because we still are seeing first-time voters from all over the world who are coming here, and to make sure they know how to, number one, check to make sure they're actually registered to vote, and then to make sure they get to the right machine, and then to make sure that they put the ballot in the machine that can tabulate, their vote and count their vote. It is very, very rewarding, but also, as you know, it's more than a notion, because things that we take for granted, a lot of folks have never done before. Thanks.
Yeah. Great comment. Thank you for that. Anybody else? I might call on a couple of people here in the time we've got, but I'll open the floor up if any questions as well from anyone. I'm going to try to call on a couple of people that I know. Dennis in Pittsburgh, I know you've worked as a poll worker, and one of the things that, as I recall from your comment, was you experienced the security in voting. Could you, if you have the ability to unmute yourself, share a little bit about your experience as a poll worker?
I'm unmuted as a poll worker here in Allegheny County, which is in southwestern Pennsylvania. You go through 2 hours of hands-on training before you can be a poll worker. Shows you how the machine works. And there are so many security features built into setting up the machine. You've got numbered, what's the right word? Zip ties on different bags. You got to cut them. You got to record the number. You got to write it down, sign off on it. Then you open it up. You take out a flash drive. You stick the flash drive in the machine. Then you print out a zero total that shows that the machine has no votes in it. You have to post that on the wall for everybody that comes in so they could see it. And then if you're the minority clerk, which I've been the last couple of times, you take all the paperwork at the end of the evening that shows how many votes for the Democrats, how many votes for the Republicans, how many for independent, and all the different senators and Congress people and mayors and whatever. And I have to keep a paper copy of that in my possession for 1 year after the election is closed, just in case there are any questions come up. In fact, I keep those particular envelopes, and they're pretty fat envelopes, on the floorboard of the passenger side of my car, so I know where they're at all the time.
Thank you.
End
Dennis.
of the evening, when you break down the voting machine, I think 4 different people have to sign off that, yes, we took the flash drive out, and we put it in the yellow envelope and put zip tie number 3457, whatever, on it. And then it goes to the Allegheny County warehouse along with the other voting machines, and everything gets tabulated.
Thank you, Dennis. I see Jack and Angine in Lexington put in a really important comment about the long hours, and for a number of members of our community who might be interested in us, as they note, it can be a 10-hour day, a 12-hour day. I'm going to turn back to Marvin or Miriam. Are there any ways in which you try to work with folks just to try to make sure everybody gets a break or gets some time off their feet? Or what would you say about people that might be concerned about just the length of time that's required because you want to make sure there's enough time that people can vote before work, after work, and in between?
Yeah, we give people breaks, definitely. But it is a long day. Our polls are open 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. So people have to be there by 5 o'clock to open. And we leave 8 or 8:30 usually. So it is a very long day. Virginia, or at least Loudoun County, I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but some jurisdictions will offer half days, and I know that some don't, but you can work a half day in Loudoun County. So for people that can't do that very long day, which is hard, they have that half day. And as I said, we give people breaks, and I've never had a problem with being so busy that people can't take breaks or not having enough people. So, but it's hard.
Yeah.
In that respect.
Great. Well, again, I want to thank everyone for participating, for listening in. Those of you listening in on a later date, thank you for taking the time to listen to this important conversation. Again, September 5th is the action day coming up next week. We will at NPCA be putting out more information, a great time and way for you to be doing work to promote this to your friends, your family, your neighbors, other returned Peace Corps volunteers, even anywhere around the country. One of the things that we will be doing as well from our end is trying to do some targeted outreach. For example, as Sandra mentioned, New Hampshire is a place that has an upcoming primary, so there's an urgent need. And as it turns out, we're on Thursday evening, we're hosting a New Hampshire advocacy half-hour Zoom call. So hopefully we can promote Power the Polls to folks from the Granite State who are joining in that night. And again, I'm very excited to see that more people have been signing up. So what I'm going to do now is close the recording, and then we'll stay on here for another 10 minutes or so just for other general updates related to our August, September mobilization. But thank you all for joining tonight. And thanks to Sandra from Partner the Polls for joining us this evening, and wishing everyone to be well and consider being a poll worker between now and Election Day.